Welcome to the Little Red Podcast, which brings you China from beyond the Beijing Beltway. I'm Graham Smith from the Australian National University's Department of Pacific Affairs, and I'm joined by my co-host, Louisa Lim, former China correspondent for the BBC and NPR, now at the Centre for Advancing Journalism at Melbourne University. We're on air thanks to support from the Australian Centre on China in the World. For the latest in our series on belief, we're looking at online misogyny in China, or the growth of a digital manosphere. It's become such an issue that China's largest incel forum was shut down by Baidu at the end of May for a second time. It was only a temporary shutdown, but it speaks to a larger problem. To discuss this, we're delighted to be joined by three guests who've been researching the manosphere. Ling Tang, a cultural studies lecturer at the University of Melbourne, Yihuan Zhang, a graduate researcher at the University of Macau, and later in the episode we'll be joined by Qian Huang, an expert in digital vigilantism at the University of Groningen. Yihuan, let's start with you. It seems the digital manosphere first came to public attention in 2020. I mean, what brought it this attention?
I was operated a video vlogger account on Chinese video platform Bilibili, and I just promote and spread some, Western Marxism and feminist discourses on Chinese public sphere. But in an occasion that I commented on the Chinese biggest manosphere, Sun Shaochuan Ba, and I just make a comment on this, online misogynistic forum. And that video attracted many misogynistic attackers on my account. And they reported my video content and reported my account to the platform censorship. And so I also get, the physical threats from these kind of misogynist communities. So I had to cancel my account at that time. I just tell my story of this kind of incident to Ling, and Ling shared their previous experience about the similar things on the Chinese another platform Weibo. So we want to figure out how this kind of platform censorship can allow this discourse to exist in the West American world. This kind of extreme misogynist forums has been banned several times, but in China it is very visible and widespread over cross-platform visibilities.
And Ling, where do you think this sort of misogyny stems from? I mean, is it sort of part of an international thing, or is it specifically a Chinese or even a Confucian kind of model of misogyny? Is it different to what we would understand in the West as misogyny?
I think there's certainly a lot of similarities. And then I also think that the rise of misogyny is in no way just a phenomenon after 2020, because it can date back to, let's say, the onset of feminism. There's always been backlash against feminism from the misogynist group. But then later on, it evolved into this Manosphere and also just men's rights groups. So I feel that in Chinese studies, we always have this, let's say, China exceptionist sort of point of view, as if China is so different from the rest of the world. But however, on this particular topic, I can see a lot of similarities. Lily Charlie-Raki wrote this book called Wrongs, The Weaponization of Victimhood, and then in which she talks about how Manosphere or a misogynist group in Anglo-America world sort of weaponize victimhood and consider themselves as victims, and hence the victim of what? Of feminism, victims of women, because according to misogynist group, women sort of possess this power of reproduction and also sex, so that men lose the right to sex, right? Just to cite the title of another book. So this phenomenon it's almost identical. Men's voice online forum in the States rise after the economic crisis after 2008. Whereas in China, with the onset of economic reform, but most importantly, after the COVID, we can see dramatic slowdown of the Chinese economic growth and a lot of unemployment among even urban, well-educated men. And then so our argument is really that the class antagonism is ushered into this gender antagonism and hatred against opposite sex.
Reading through your paper, I'm struck by the extent to which what you've seen in China is to an extent almost a reaction against online feminism. You've found that this is almost not cracked down on. Are there any aspects of the manosphere that are of concern to the Chinese state, that you're seeing a little bit of censorship happening, or is it just a free-for-all?
I want to add some points about the difference between the misogyny in the Euro-American context and in China, and we can talk about the state's role in this kind of processing. And firstly, observe the similar discourses they share between the Chinese manosphere and the Western manosphere. For example, like the red pill philosophy.
Maybe explain what is the red pill philosophy? What are you referring to there?
The red pill philosophy is about the metaphor borrowed from the film Matrix, Maybe we all know that film. If you take the red pill, you will awake and you will see the true face of the world, and you will see the truth of the world. And they show the truth of these online misogynist groups is about women are the oppressors, and men are oppressed by women during the whole history. So men should wake up and see this kind of truth of the world, and the men should get their solidarity to resist this kind of female-centered world. They think women are the oppressors as a whole. They show the story that we are suffering from this kind of heteronormative relationships with you guys, women, and the feminism also want to gain more privilege for women from their relationships with men.
I find it really difficult to understand, though, how they can argue that women have been the oppressors throughout history in a country where political power has almost never been held by a woman, so rarely, and where, women are not represented at the highest level of government or institutions. I mean, how do they construct this argument? It makes no sense to me.
Yes. They will adopt some, biological essentialism, like, fake scientific knowledges. But I don't know, they just kind of create this kind of biological essentialist discourse about, in the genius way, the men, from the evolution of human history, the men are the subjected to the sacrifice. Like, they will put the example that the military activities, men are the, sacrifices, the soldiers died in the war. And the women, they just stayed at home, they're safe. It's about their desire to effectively construct this kind of storytelling, this kind of narrative to justify their misogynistic attacks.
I just want to add on that I feel like this is also shared among a misogynist group all over the world, how they perceive women's power, because a lot of it is really about politics of desirability and the right to sex. So most of the men would think that they are deprived of the right to sex and reproduction because it is women who sort of possess this power to give and permit whether they can have sex with them or have children with them. And as feminism teach and sort of liberate women from like a more sort of women's role, traditional role in patriarchy, they feel that they are threatened because women now sort of are become harder to police or become harder to grant that right that they think they should have.
Take us back a little bit. I mean, you poured over hundreds of these posts on this site called the Sun Xiaoquan Bar on Baidu. I mean, how did this site come to be sort of the go-to spot for angry men? How did it develop? Because it's got millions of people that go there. It's not a small place. How did it become so big?
So it's like Reddit, and the Sun Xiaoquan Bar is, subforum was initially formed by fans of Sun Xiaoquan, who is a popular online gaming streamer, known for his aggressive and often misogynistic verbal attacks on female streamers during their own live streaming. And after Sun Xiaoquan retired from streaming in 2018, the bar evolved into the largest and most influential misogynistic online communities in China. Members began to refer to themselves as rat. In Chinese, it's pronounced as 鼠鼠, rat. And expressing their sense of social marginalization and low status through self-deprecating humor. So it's all about the construction of, male victimhood. There are self-narratives of their own victimhoods.
Rat is basically a new term for self-depreciation. And then it's very similar to Daosi because Daosi is sort of like the hair around the penis. Basically, that's it, right? So it's sort of like this self-depreciating to say that, oh, I am not like Gao Fu Shuai, tall, handsome, and rich, which is the hegemonic masculinity. So I'm opposite to that. I'm not an alpha man. But however, a lot of research about Diao Si is also sort of claiming that it has some type of like class consciousness. And then so it can evolve into, let's say, lying flat is another like sort of class oriented movement. Like we're against like becoming rich, tall, and handsome. We just want to lie flat. And we just want to like sort of escape from this capitalist neoliberal regime. But however, Red we see from Sun Shaochuanba, it's a little bit different from that. So a part of it can be like sort of like class solidarity, because a lot of it is like men's self-help like sort of posts. And similarly, there's like a parallel phenomenon. It's like no fab. It's like no fab is another like misogynist movement. It's not really that like stereotypical misogynist, because it's about men sort of reframe and not watching pornography and not masturbate. In China, there's also like a similar phenomenon. So they share like a lot of like personal stories and then like life struggles, and then they become like self-helping groups as well. So it's like self-help groups for like ret, and self-help groups for these people who feel so marginalized in both like becoming the alpha male, like fitting in hegemonic masculinity, but also, and then losing that their hierarchy in the politics of desirability too. So in the end, becoming this nobody.
How much is this linked to Andrew Tate and that sort of strain of hyper misogynistic online behavior in the West? Is this crossing over, or do you think this is totally organic?
I feel that for the red pill philosophy sort of Bilibili video, I think they cite another person's work other than Andrew Tate. And Andrew Tate in particular, Yihuan can correct me, I don't feel like there's a lot of visibility of like one individual. But I also don't think that, we also don't believe that Chinese like misogynist group is just like on its own China exceptionalism. But then there are, of course, like interesting vloggers that have like quite interesting arguments. For instance, one of the groups is actually pseudo-communist group. And then so these pseudo-communist like vloggers would argue that men face oppression, both from the capitalist, but also from women. And then so we can also see like this is quite interesting, because it speaks to sort of how Marxism and basic ideas of Marxism are sort of in the everyday education, socialist and post-socialist China. And Andrew Tate, we checked a bit of his arguments. It is quite similar actually to a lot of sort of this hyper masculine and even just like, or even the opposite to like CC boys. So when I looked at Andrew Tate's sort of arguments, there's definitely like similarities to Wolf Warrior, but Wolf Warrior is good man, protect women and protect the country kind of masculinity. It doesn't have that sort of like derogative, or even like Trump is totally like, it could be like just throw out misogynist words and phrases from here and there, right? Like grab women's pussy, for instance. It's also like highly like direct and quite extreme misogynist.
We're now joined by Qian Huang from the University of Groningen, whose research explores the links between nationalism and misogyny. And in particular, she spent far too long on the internet looking at digital vigilantism against unpatriotic Chinese women. Qian Huang, can you give us a bit of background? When did this phenomenon of Chinese incels really emerge?
So the topic of Chinese incel really comes in as a accidental finding for my bigger project. So I, in my PhD research, I mainly focus on digital vigilantism and online harassment, trolling. And then during my research, I realized that it is not very, it is not very equally distributed in terms of who are targeted. So what I find is that in general, the women are more heavily targeted as a victim of digital vigilantism or online harassment. And then specifically, no matter what kind of trigger there was about this vigilantism, they're always being trolled in terms of their sexual moralities or specifically qualities related to their gender and sex.
How bad is that sort of digital vigilantism against women on the Chinese internet? If you put it in a sort of the context of what's happening in the West and Andrew Tate and all of his followers, how does it kind of match up?
I do think that it matches up quite nicely in the sense that it is not something that only happens in China. So the research that I did was part of a bigger comparative project. So at that time, my PhD supervisor, Daniel Chotier, so he was doing the research in the Anglophone context, so in the North America, UK, and also the Netherlands. And then we have another colleague who did a project in Russia. So when compare these phenomena, we do find broader patterns, and specifically the gendered pattern is very obvious there. In China, it shares that kind of characteristic. It is a lot more combined with nationalism and also a little bit of the populism that you can find. But of course, this is also not absent in the Western context. But I do think that nationalism might be replaced by the alt-right or the white supremacism.
And can you pinpoint the moment or the sort of time period where this online misogyny started to appear?
Wow. That goes way back. What I'm describing is more the digital vigilantism part, but if we want to talk about online misogyny in general in China, we really need to go back. So even if you go really back to I think early 2000s, when you have the first generation of online celebrity, you will see that a lot of these female internet celebrities will be trolled based on their appearances, the most blatant and also kind of like trolling type of misogyny. And then if you go a bit forward, I think in the 2010 era, and then you will find this group of people who start to call themselves 屌丝, which is pubic hair. And then, so this is a group of people who, at the beginning, it is mainly male internet users who call themselves that. And even though it's self-deprecating, in the broader context, when they talk about themselves as the pubic hair, they are matching themselves up against the 高富帅, so the tall, rich, and handsome guys, right? And then in that context, they are trolling the women who are going for the 高富帅 instead of them, and then specifically saying that Chinese women are gold diggers, or they are specifically going for the richness instead of true love. And then you will see a lot of that kind of misogyny is more subtle, embedded in that kind of conversation. So gradually from that, and then you see a more politicized and also a more populist and nationalistic way of expressing their misogyny, especially when they see on the internet there are more content creators or more visibility of Chinese women together with foreign men. And that is the moment when you see that a lot of these kind of like very nasty, misogynistic comments about how Chinese women hold foreigners, especially white men, in esteem. That kind of behavior, they do see that as as traitors and also as problematic and also gold diggers in that sense.
You wrote an article for the China Story where you talked about a website called Hoops or Hupu that appeared to be a bit of a site. I mean, is that representative of the kind of place that Chinese incels might gather?
Yeah, it does. So Hupu and also Zhihu to a certain degree, so the Chinese version of Quora. So that is also somehow a lot of male users gather. And then sometimes Chinese women joke that it is because men really like to answer people's question to show how knowledgeable they are. That is why they gather on Quora and like Zhihu, this platform.
The men, they do love to mansplain.
Yes, exactly. So there is a reason why they gather there. So except for that one and Hupu and The other places, for example, Bilibili. So that is kind of like also a YouTube space where you upload videos. And then, of course, because it started as a kind of like a lot of fandom that's related to anime, manga, and these kind of like subcultural groups. And therefore, there is also a very big user base that are male and especially young male users.
When I read some of these comments, I'm struck by just how miserable a lot of these guys are. Like, you know, for all the vitriol behind it all, you're like, wow, you're really, really unhappy. I mean, is there anything in particular in the Chinese case? I'm thinking of, say, the gender ratio that kind of makes it different from what we see in the West.
Yeah, I think the differences that I see is that in the Western kind of misogyny or this incel culture, the criticism is mainly on sexual appeals. The grievances is mainly on how the masculinity it is perceived, and specifically you have to be tall, you have to be buffed, and there's like this mimetic kind of like video on TikTok that's about 6'4", blue eyes. Finance.
Trust fund, 6'5", blue eyes. Finance, trust fund, 6'5", blue eyes. Finance.
Yeah, it is a very trending meme. And then so that represents a certain level of that ideal masculinity in the West, I would say. But in China, you will see that a lot more grievances is really focusing on the economic and financial parts. So one of the common threads is that they were complaining about caili, about the bride price, and specifically criticizing that Chinese women and their families really want a big chunk of money or house ownership or cars before they even get married, right? So these kind of grievances is significantly different from the Western incel culture. It is the social mobility, and also it is the economic pressure that gets to them. But I do see this as a very major factor in their grievances.
When you talk about caili or bride price, you're referring to the amount of money given to the bride's family by the groom.
Traditionally, pinli or caili is basically the money that the groom side has to pay to the bride side, the family. It doesn't have to be the father or the mother, but it could be to the family in general, to show their sincerity and also kind of like binding contract. And then this bride price sometimes will be taken by the bride also to their their nuclear home, their future nuclear home, as kind of a starting fund. So in the past, it's probably a little bit more transactional, but nowadays I think to a certain degree, there is this kind of symbolic function and also this reassurance that the women will not suffer in this coming marriage.
And it could be up to several 100,000 yuan, is that right?
Yeah, because it really varies it varies hugely. For example, in the southern provinces like Fujian or Guangdong, it might differ hugely to the northern provinces.
One thing I'm curious about, because you've looked at this so broadly, is there, even if kind of in a sort of a very minor sort of way, a Chinese equivalent of Andrew Tate, like influences that drive the community in a way with their ideals and their financial goals in many ways? There
is no equivalent to Andrew Tate. In China, it is very hard to find such character. But there are several male users who were once these kind of like opinion leaders in that respect. So one person is Zhu Zhou. So I think he has already been banned, but he was probably more active a decade ago. So his whole point is about how women's worth is completely based on their youth, their ability to give birth to children, breast size, and all these kind of like very ticking box thing that you can imagine. So he claimed that he has a lot of mistresses who are willing to carry his children. And then so he rates different kind of women based on these kind of criteria, and then is very vocal about that the women should be brought back to families, and then their worth should be judged based on these kind of things. So he was quite popular back at that time, but because you can see that talking about mistresses and talking about having multiple kids, that's also against the country's law. So he was banned not very long ago, but so he's kind of disappeared a little bit. But some of these, the people who set the discourses has a lot of link to nationalism, had a lot of link to the populism kind of discourses. So I think it is a combination of ideologies.
But it seems that the state-run media is actually amplifying misogyny in some ways, talking about feminism being used by foreign agents to subvert China and feminism being toxic and that kind of thing. I mean, how influential do you think state-run media are in this debate?
I do think that they do not engage or encourage the very outrageous type of misogyny. So you wouldn't see the kind of discourses about women's worth is purely on their the ability to carry children. But of course, if it has something to do with movement, with social movement, with collective actions, so that is when the state-owned media will come in and then interfere in that sense, and then encourage the kind of discourses that, feminism movement or gender-related issues are sponsored by foreign agencies and foreign money, and therefore we should be very careful about it. So I do think that the state-owned media intervene in that way, but not in the most blatant misogynistic discourses that you can find.
If anything, to flip it around, I'm a bit surprised there's not even more misogyny. If you just look at the numbers, I mean, you have 30 to 40 million men who are not going to have a partner because of the gender imbalance. And very early in the history of the show, we had a guest on who looked at the economics of crime, and she found that the highest crime prefectures were the prefectures with the biggest gender imbalance. And it was an almost perfect linear correlation. Like, men were being driven to crime by the need to raise money for a bride price, essentially. Is the anxiety at being unable to find a partner at the base of a lot of this misogyny?
I do think so. I think that's one of the very crucial factors there, which is that they do believe that they should have the right to find a partner. And if they cannot, they have to blame something. They have to find a reason why they cannot do this. And then they cannot fathom that it is because of this gender ratio. The only thing they can think about is, first of all, women don't want to get married anymore. And the reason how they rationalize is this, the reason why women don't want to marry anymore is because they are greedy. They want more than what they were offered before, right? So that's the line of thinking in that sense, I would say. And of course, they will blame the feminism movement. They will blame a lot of these like capitalism culture that corrupt our women.
It's interesting that this comes at a time when President Xi Jinping is kind of emphasizing that women should play a large role in the home, and he's talking a lot about love and marriage and fertility and family. That's not a coincidence, is it?
I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it is a cycle, right? So it is a dialectic kind of function there you can see. I'm not going to say that it is caused by his encouraged ideologies or encouraged family mode, but I do see them kind of correlate quite well. And then especially when the internet users or when this incels beliefs being confirmed by the state narrative, by the mainstream narrative, and it affirms them and it reassures them that they're on the right path, and then it is okay to engage in this kind of discussion online.
And not just okay, but potentially patriotic, right?
Yeah, you will see a lot of discourses about women should shoulder more responsibility of continuing the Chinese lineage the bloodline. You should have the social responsibility to your country, to your nation, to ethnicity, to continue by carrying children with Chinese men specifically. So you should not carry children with foreign men because that is not Chinese lineage.
Well, it's almost a straight line with the white supremacist thread you see in a lot of incel culture in the US.
Yeah, I do see there's a lot of overlap, right? And then especially I think in UK and the US, there's like this big narrative about the great replacement conspiracy, right? So I think that match up quite nicely, except for that the Western one is more based on race, but the Chinese one is more based on the idea, the constructed identity of Chineseness.
And of course, Confucianism plays a large part in that too, doesn't it?
Yeah, I do think the continuation of certain beliefs embedded in the Confucianism still carry some weight. And then, of course, a lot of times they refer back to what is being taught in the past, especially about 三从四德, about women's morality and their ability to, their responsibility to obey their husbands, obey their male family members. So I do think that it carries, but I don't think that's the most important factor, especially if you compare it with the Western context. The fact that both have these kind of similar mentality and sentiment to going back to the more traditional format of a gender dynamic.
And when you talk about 三从四德, you're talking about the three follows: follow your father, follow your husband, follow your son, and the sort of four womanly virtues.
Yes, exactly.
Graeme, do you want to ask a final question?
Look, I could mansplain something.
Go ahead.
Good luck.
No, let me mansplain the four family virtues too. I mean, where do you see this leading? Because it seems to be building up, and definitely not, in abatement by any means. Do you think this will be a feature of Chinese nationalism in the future? I mean, where is this community headed?
Yeah, I do see a quite bleak future. Not only in China, but just really in general. I do think this kind of gender gap or polarization of gender ideologies, or of how gender should be performed, and also how it should be moralized, is going further and further away between these two kind of like group of people. But what I'm very excited and encouraged to see is that Chinese women, and also in general, women in general in the world, is fighting against that. The very obvious polarization is also because of this, because of the social movements, and because of the willingness to fight, and also the capacity to fight the misogyny, is very obvious across societies, and also especially in China. You will see a lot of Chinese feminist stand-up comedians, writers, influencers. No matter which kind of spectrum they're falling into, I do see there is a broader discussion about gender equality, and also understanding of how femininity, womanhood could look like. So I'm very encouraged to see that, but I do see the conflicts. I do see this polarization not heading in a good direction.
And maybe I just want to finish off with a very speculative question. I mean, it strikes me that in the West, when we see that polarization, it's very much a political polarization, with men overwhelmingly becoming more conservative and women overwhelmingly becoming more left-wing. But in China, when those kind of political options aren't really available to people, do you think that gender becomes even more of a polarizing force because it is acceptable?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I agree. So in the sense that, yeah, the potential topics to debate about online publicly are very limited. Therefore, this becomes a hot issue that people feel free to air their resentment, air their grievances. When I was listening to you talking about the gender division of voting patterns in the US, I also want to mention that actually there is a trend called tradwife. There is a growing number of conservative women that is also endorsing these kind of gender ideologies. And that is a very strong social power as well. Of course, there is a gendered pattern there in terms of who are more conservative and who are more progressive. But yeah, there are exceptions, and also, of course, the same thing in China. There are also feminist men trying to kind of support the social movements as well. And of course, there is criticism about some Chinese women, the Chinese version of tradwife, which is called jiaoqi. So that group of women are also quite obvious in terms of upholding the more traditional gender roles and also propagating the gender ideology that the misogynistic view holds.
Might that be the new Lei Fang, a Chinese tradwife?
Could be, yes.
I think that's a great place to end it. Thanks so much. This has been really interesting.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
You've been listening to the Literate Podcast, bringing you China from beyond the Beijing Beltway. Many thanks to our guests and to my co-host, Louisa Ling. We're on air thanks to support from the Australian Centre on China and the World. Our editing is by Andy Hazel, background research by Wing Kwong, our music is by Susie Wilkins, and our cartoons and GIFs are courtesy of Seb Danta. Bye for now.